When life gets unpredictable, preparation matters. In medicine, it's all about staying alert, ready for whatever comes through the door. On the road, it's no different. That's why Volvo designs vehicles to help anticipate risk, reduce harm, and protect lives. The Volvo XC90's advanced safety systems inspire confident decisions wherever the road takes you. The Volvo XC90, for life. Proud sponsor of the Pit Podcast. Learn more at volvocars.ca/safety.
Now, the Big Five on the Elias Mecco Show. Brought to you by investment advisor Richard Lapointe of CIBC Wood Gundy. Richard Lapointe can always be reached at 847-6324.
Oh, you know what's coming. Shoutouts. That's what's coming. Time for shoutouts. What is it? It's Wednesday, 29th, by the way, for those of you who have thrown out your calendars. By the way, shout out to everyone that paid full price for a calendar in December of 2019, saying, man, 2020 is going to be the best. I'm going to organize. Now you don't even need that calendar. Every day is the same. Shout out to Ahunsik. All my people in Ahunsik, shout out to you. Shout out to delivery drivers. Specifically, this guy, yesterday, I am on a street corner. I'm going to cross the street. I'm standing on a street corner. This guy's on the opposite street corner. He's walking towards me. He's veering, though. He's going to stay away from me. But as he's approaching me, he points to me. The good point. You know, the point that you give when that's your brother. You know, that's your bro. It's like, I know that face. He's pointing at me and he's saying this. I know that face. I know that voice. And I was like, hey, man, how you doing? So I was like, good. He thanked me for a shout out because I'd shouted out the people at St. Mary's. And he said, don't forget the Uber drivers. That's what he said to me. And I said, I won't. And he's driving for Uber Eats. And I want to point this out. I told you the story here, how some restaurants, they're getting dinged hard by delivery services, which take 30-40%. Uber Eats and all of the other ones, just Skip the Dishes, Foodora, which is now no longer going to be in Canada as of May 11th. They take so much. And I sort of said on the air, you know what, guys, if you can, don't order from Uber Eats, order directly from the store. Let's keep that money in Canada. I heard from the Uber drivers, by the way, the Uber Eats drivers. They were unhappy with me. But you get my point. It's all about balance. Support your delivery drivers. Give them a big tip, no matter what service. Shout out to the mute button. Yeah, you know it. The mute button. How many of you have been on a conference call, Zoom call, and desperately needed the mute button? You press that, you can do whatever you want. You can release whatever gases you need to release because the mute button exists. People who didn't know about the mute button, virtual parliament, 338 Canadian MPs, but a shout out to virtual parliament, which was rather entertaining. And we will play a clip of how entertaining virtual parliament is during the Big Five. A shout out to 2 meters. Yeah, 2 meters. Not 6 feet. Shout out 2 meters. What is 6 feet? 1.83 meters. That's why the U.S. is in the mess they're in. They're only doing 6 feet. We're doing 2 meters. It's that extra 17 centimeters. Only country that doesn't have metric. What a bunch of dopes. Shout out 2 meters. And a shout out to Saint Michel. Why do I like Saint Michel? Because it could apply to literally dozens of places in Quebec. Did I mean the metro station? Did I mean Saint Michel on the South Shore? Nobody knows. But a shout out to Saint Michel. Trudie Mason, how you doing?
I'm very well.
You ready for this Big Five?
I am.
What do you think, Trudie, about our economic relaunch plan? We're getting back to work. The factories are opening. A lot of caveats, right? And, they are taking a sort of clinical approach there, I hope. They are also saying this is a risk, right? This is the government themselves saying this. Dr. Horatio Arruda, direct quote, it's a risky bet. So, we could go over the details here and what starts on May 4th, what starts on May 11th, depending on what part of town you're in, depending on what industry. But Trudie, a risky bet. Do you take the bet, Trudie?
I think the province has to, and I do, the devil's in the caveats. Mm-hmm. We'll modify that saying.
Yeah.
I do think that we have to be careful how we go about this. I think individual workplaces are going to have to look very closely at how they're organized. And I'm just thinking back to how our functioning here at the station has changed drastically over the last couple of months, and how we're working differently, and how we all had to adapt, and there was, it was not comfortable. All change is uncomfortable to some degree, and a lot of this change was not easy to get used to, and now every workplace is going to have to go through that, because we've continued to operate under modified circumstances.
Absolutely.
And now all these other businesses. So I think we have to proceed cautiously. We have to err on the side of caution. We have to understand that people are going to be afraid. But I think it has to be done. I think it absolutely has to be done, because for every week we remain shut down, there's a knock-on effect and risks and deaths in other aspects of life.
I agree with you, Trudie, so much here. You do have to take a risk. I can see, a debate as to May the 4th the right day, or May the 11th, or maybe it should be May the 18th. I can see the debate there. But we actually need to get back to some sense of normalcy, because we don't have that vaccine. I'm going to get back to that point. If you're not okay with businesses getting back up on May 11th, May 18th, what would you need to satisfy you to say it's okay, we can go through with it? To me, there's one thing that has to happen, and they did talk about it yesterday. Dr. Horacio Arruda brought up testing, right? And I really need to see them back it up, right? They're talking a big talk. They're talking, 20,000, 30,000 daily tests, bringing up the capacity. If they can do that, if they can pull it off, and they say they can, well, then this plan makes all the more sense. And you brought up a really good point, Trudie, because we really do have to start thinking about it. Some of you who are listening to me are living through it, by the way, that how the situation in a home, when you're stuck in a home for too long, there are a lot of bad things that come out of that. Mental health issues, right? I'm reading that, the Douglas Institute is modifying their facilities. They're prepared for an influx of people that are suffering from mental health issues that are COVID-19 related. On this show, we've talked to people at women's shelters and family shelters. This is not a good time, right? And then you've got children that are victims of, child abuse, and there's child welfare issues. You need kids to get back to school to alleviate some of those concerns. So to me, if you want to sort of have a balance, and it's very clear that Dr. Horacio Arruda and Quebec Health is thinking about that. They're thinking about suicides. They're thinking about all the other ramifications. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to take this balance, and we're going to slowly, one of the best analogies is the dimmer switch, right? You can't just do on and off. You're going to take that dimmer switch and bring it up. We can have a debate as to whether you bring the dimmer up to 20% or 25 or 30% or 50, but I think that's the approach, and I'm all on board with it as long as they get testing up to snuff.
I don't even know if they can do enough testing to reassure me. I would like a reliable antibody test. I would like those reliable antibody tests to be conducted here on a wide scale, so we can understand just how many people have had the infection so far, what the penetration has been in the population, because I think a lot of us have had it, and we either didn't know, or we dismissed it, or we could not go for testing in the early days.
Would you want randomized testing?
I think that's a really important part of understanding the epidemic here in Quebec, and they've raised that question. Public health is talking about that. The other reassuring thing I got from Dr. Arruda is that he's willing to yank it all back if they see the spike. So that means this is not an irreversible course, and we may have to step back. I'm sure that would be very frustrating for business, but the whole thing is to keep the hospitals functioning and to keep it so that we're not in Italy, where doctors are making the decision as to who gets the respirator.
And it is better than nothing, Trudie, right? I think it's better than nothing. On the subject of testing, one thing we need to point out here is that this is a very interesting pandemic because we don't have historical parallels. The best way I've heard it put is that, if it was an influenza pandemic, and this is not an influenza pandemic, we could look at previous pandemics and say, okay, what did they do? What worked? What didn't? This virus is so different. It's so unique. The historical data we have isn't years, isn't decades. It's literally weeks. We can only learn from the countries that are 4, 5, and 6 weeks ahead of us in this pandemic. So I think that's what the Quebec government's doing here. And when you bring up, the testing thing and how valid it will be, a lot of the countries that have nipped this in the bud, what did they do so well? They did testing well. South Korea did testing really well. So that's why I've got some faith. And to me, let's listen to the doctors. But I have faith because there have been the countries that are 4, 5, 6 weeks ahead of us. They've seen success when testing was robust.
The top stories in the city. The Big Five on the Elias Macco Show.
Trudie Mason is hermetically sealed behind a bubble, and I'm Elias Mackos. It's the Big Five. Trudie, I have a question here for you.
Okay.
A question here, and it's basically comes from a text comment I got at 514-800. And this texter, they write a long thing, but the premise here is that very clearly they believe that the government is putting money before people. I want to get your thought on that. Is this a question of the government putting money before people?
I think that's 50% correct. But the other 50% is putting people ahead because, like I mentioned a few moments ago, there is a risk to remaining in lockdown. There's a risk to mental health. There's a risk to people's health deteriorating and them dying from other causes. People staying away from hospital, not getting, for example, checked out for heart pain and they end up dying of a heart attack. Longer term risk to kids. In some children's lives, school is the normal. Mm-hmm. School is the safe place. School is where someone makes sure that they get something to eat in a subsidized program. Home life is not good. So there are risks to staying in lockdown. And we seem to be just, what about the risk to the teachers? There's a risk to staying in lockdown that we're not addressing, in my view. Mm-hmm. There's a balance. It's not all about money, in my view.
And this isn't a free-for-all, right? The way that we are bringing back the economy, the way that we're bringing back the schools, that's not a free-for-all, right? The schools are elementary, voluntary. There's a certain way that it's being done. I do want to say, I may feel like I'm going to sound like a Republican here, like when it comes to the choice between money and people, money is people in a certain sense, right? If you're not bringing in money and if you're not working, that can have some major effects too. So sometimes money comes into the equation of saying, okay, are we treating people well in a certain instance? Trudie, here's the thing. You're going to bring people back into the workplace, right? And the formula they have is 50 employees get to come back in a workplace. And then if you have more, it's half of the rest of the capacity, right? So, that's the formula they're doing. But still, you're going to have a lot of people in a workplace that, and maybe you close off the kitchen and you close off common areas, you do stuff like that. But you're going to have a lot of people in the same area. For a lot of people, they're going to say in their heads, well, I can go to work with 400 different people in my mega house warehouse. Well, why can't I go down the street and hang out with my neighbor? Right? Let's go and we'll have a dinner party. And in other places across Canada, there's certain provinces that have started this idea of creating a bubble with another family. So the next stage here is that you pick a family and, the two families can now meet with each other and see each other. So are you worried that some of these things that we're doing, whether it's the schools or the economy, will lead people to say, well, then why can't I just call up my friend and let's have a beer together?
Well, sure. I think that's happening already. Mm-hmm. I think, just in talking to our own circle of friends, almost everybody has this guilty little secret. They've got some guilty little indulgence, the grandkids come to visit on weekends because the parents are overwhelmed and it gives them a break. Oh, well, I go for walks with one particular friend. I have a babysitter in to tutor my kids. Almost everybody, and that's just my own personal experience. It is doing something like that. I think the whole key here is what we know, what the stats here in Quebec have shown us is that the vast majority of people who have a very tough time with this are older. Mm-hmm. And if you are over 60, I think you should ignore all of this loosening. I think you should stay out of the stores. Yeah. I think that you should stay away from your grandkids.
Which the government is saying, right? Yeah. They are saying that, 60-year-olds don't go back to work. Teachers who are over 60 don't go back. This is what they are saying.
And so I think we can manage. And I am, of course, absolutely assuming that the long-term care homes and the senior residences are in lockdown for months.
Trudie, what was one of the most interesting things about yesterday's daily press briefing with Premier Legault? He brought out a prop for I think the first time, right? And it was like a cardboard placard with a graph, and it showed what he calls the two worlds of Quebec: the long-term care, seniors' homes, those facilities, the deaths in those homes, and the deaths amongst the rest of the population. And it has been a long time that those death totals, it's like 9, 11, 8, 10, 10, 11. It's hovering at the 10 for a couple of weeks. I did get a text message here saying the science says there needs to be 14 days downward trajectory and the number of new cases per day. Otherwise, there's a serious risk of relapse. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an infectious disease expert. It's clear to me that what the government is doing is saying we're not going to count anything happening in these homes. We're only going to count what's happening outside of the homes, and that gives us the indication that things are going well.
Well, you also have to keep in mind that we're still more than a week away for the outlying schools and 2 weeks away. Even though the teachers are being called back, I'm assuming they're all adults and can social distance the way you would in a store. So we may yet see those numbers.
Yeah. Can I point this out, Trudie? I saw the most unbelievable quote from a head of a school board in Quebec who said, well, they've only given us 2 weeks. There's not enough time. My response to that, by the way, is what have you been doing for the other 8 weeks of this, right? There's not just 2 weeks to prepare. Every single school board, and I want parents to know this, in 2 weeks' time or in 3 weeks' time when you send your kids back to school and that school gives you the line, we only got 2 weeks to prepare, that's why everything's so chaotic, they did not have 2 weeks, right? People at school boards were still working, and they should have had a plan ready to go or thinking about a plan for the last 8 weeks and all the scenarios. That's their job. They should have been thinking about that. And by the way, the government gave them in the planning idea, in the planning way of looking at things, they gave them a bit of a gift where it's only elementary school students and only voluntary, right? So I just want to preempt that pushback we're going to get in 2 weeks from school boards. Oh, we couldn't possibly been ready. You had 10 weeks to prepare. Trudie, did you watch Virtual Parliament?
I watched snippets of it, yes. I actually thought it was... I probably spent more time watching that than I have...
Regular Parliament?
In one sitting, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, CJAD 800, with great pleasure, presents to you about a minute of yesterday's 3-hour Virtual Parliament. It was riveting. And let's listen now to one MP from Calgary, I believe, out west, Brad Viss, because he's got an issue with bees and blueberries.
Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that bees are crucial for our ecosystem and our agricultural sector, especially in my riding with a large concentration of Canada's blueberry farms. However, it isn't appropriate and certainly not a Team Canada approach for a Liberal MP
point
to
of
have.
Order?
I'll interrupt. We have a point of order.
I'm not here, Mr. Viss.
Ms. Jansen?
Yes, I can't hear Mr. Viss. I'm on the English channel.
Okay, Mr. Viss, are you on an English channel?
It keeps going.
I believe I am now, yes.
There you go.
Okay, very good. Okay, we're good. Mr. Viss, I'll let you continue. Thank you.
Can the Prime Minister please confirm if there is indeed a $3 billion bee farm fund?
The Honourable Minister.
Anytime you're ready.
Mr. Speaker, we know how the bee sector is important for our agriculture. I can assure you that we are working closely with them, but there is no announcement to make.
Okay,
Mr. Viss, I just want to remind the honourable members that holding up a prop is not something that is allowed.
They were holding up props. So a couple of things here. Can you believe the Conservatives were such sticklers about resuming Parliament and multiple sessions? Why? So we can have discussions like this? Is this really what we need right now, Trudie? I mean, listen, there was a lot of great stuff, by the way. It kicked off with Yves-François Blanchet questioning the Prime Minister about tax havens. And unlike a week ago, the Prime Minister said no money's going to corporations that use tax havens. That's great. That's the reason why we need Parliament. But do we need 3 sessions, 2 virtual sessions to get in stuff like this?
I am trying to err on the side of understanding that maybe in some rural regions beekeeping is really key.
It's true.
And maybe we shouldn't indulge in our urban Quebec bias here.
Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised that there weren't more vital questions about the thing that's on everybody's mind. Although I suppose if you're a beekeeper, that's on your mind.
I get it is on your mind, but can't these questions be dealt with in other ways? Like, do they have to be done in that format and use the time for that? Anyways, the Conservatives got the number of sessions they wanted. Obviously, they didn't even want these virtual ones. But one thing I actually did appreciate, you're watching this session, man, it tells you a lot about an MP on their backgrounds, right? Like what background they have behind them. They weren't allowed to use virtual backgrounds, by the way. That is one of the sort of rules along with the props and all that kind of stuff. But you can tell a lot about an MP by the way they set up their camera and what's behind them and who's got nice artwork and who's got a blank wall. I thought that was particularly interesting. But it also, we can continue with this. There was nothing wrong. The work of Parliament got done virtually. And instead of putting 338 people in the same room, if we can do it this way, I'm all for it. For a first attempt, by the way, it was great. It's only going to get better, I hope.
Yeah, I was impressed too. I had, judging from my own experience with various forms of video conferencing, I was expecting a technical storm.
And you know what they used? They used the commercial version of Zoom, right? And I was sort of wondering like what version they were going to use and what technology they were going to use. So they used a commercial. By that meaning, this is the same version that large corporations use. But it kind of makes sense to me. This is a public proceeding. They this is everything that's done in these things. They want everyone to see it. So why not use technology that works?
Well, I'm sure that China is spying on our parliamentary sessions too. It doesn't matter what form they take.
But it's public anyways.
Yeah. I would have some concern about using this long term because I think a lot of stuff gets accomplished, bipartisan stuff in some cases, which is always nice, through informal contacts on Parliament Hill, and I think that would suffer.
Yeah. But long term, I don't think there's a reason why we can say, we can do one virtual session a week so these MPs can get back to their homes and get back to their ridings and deal with issues there. I think there's some good that's going to come out of this in the way we do certain types of business. Trudie, the Pentagon has declassified UFO footage. This is footage that has been leaked on previous occasions. And throughout the years, I think it was a couple of years ago, the New York Times had a big expose with the pilots that were involved, and they showed this video. If you've never seen it, and by now, if you've seen that video over the last couple of years that's come out on various times, to describe it, it's like it's a 40-foot long tic tac. Okay, it's the shape of a tic tac, and it's rotating in the air, and it moves faster, more agile than anything that's ever been created on the earth. And every single expert says we have nowhere near this technology. It's impossible that this is Earth made. And the Pentagon, a couple days ago, they say, this is declassified. We're releasing it. This is real footage. It's
it has no wings. It's just incredible. You know what? The Pentagon had to, because they were starting to look pretty dumb. Because not only had the video leaked, but some of the pilots who were the first-hand witnesses had spoken publicly.
That's right.
So you know what?
But is this the time, Trudie, this time of crisis, now's the time to release this info, right?
Yes, because people are distracted, and anyone who would have panicked at the release of that is panicking about something else. It's the ideal time.
Holy goodness, this could be the time we find out about ET from our governments. There's no better time. You're absolutely right. Everyone's preoccupied. Trudie, thank you so much.